last time we ran a webinar, a recorded webinar, which was sent out to participants, and around about 15 people accessed that webinar. And what we were looking at in the first webinar was self-care. How do you look after yourself if you are working in a school environment? This webinar, we're going to focus on what you can do as a member of staff to influence how the school is looking after you as a member of staff and its employees. And we don't make a distinction between teachers and support staff, because in the UK, for example, teaching assistants are paid very little compared to teachers, and their career progression is poor. There isn't really a number of pathways they can take to promote themselves and then gain more income. So their mental health is not in a good place. They're frequently trying to hold down a low-paid job while looking after their own families. And some TAs are leaving, saying it's unsustainable. You know, I'm going to look for another job. I don't want to, but I need to earn more money. Some TAs are taking on a second job, and some teachers for that matter. So the problems that school staff, teaching staff face, all staff in the school face. So when we work with the school, we don't discriminate between the teaching staff and any other member of staff, including the site staff, the cooks in the kitchen, the people who clean the school. They're all part of the school community. We need to look after them. So this is what we covered in the pre-recorded webinar. First and foremost, the foundation for the work I do with schools is that in order to care for the children, we need to take care of the staff first. Because if the staff are in a poor state mentally, there is no hope that they'll be able to look after the children effectively. So in teaching, because most teachers entered the profession because they had a sense of vocation, if you like, that they wanted to help children, there's a mantra, the children must come first. So we challenge that, because if you put the children first and put the staff last, ironically, you can't put the children first because the staff won't be able to care for them. It's the same principle that if you're a parent and you don't look after yourself, then you're going to be struggling to look after your own children. We then had a look at what burnout was, how to define it, and we looked at someone called Christina Maslach, who's a world expert in burnout. She's been working in the field of occupational burnout since the 1970s. And she makes the point that it's more than tiredness. Teachers will say that they are very tired, and they are. But burnout, when you suffer from burnout, you hit a brick wall. You basically cannot do anymore. You have to stop. You will take longer than a few weeks to recover from burnout. So it's complete and utter exhaustion, even affecting your everyday activities. And you will find yourself sleeping more. You will find yourself unable to do very much more than the simple things to look after yourself. And looking after someone else, if you have burnout, is virtually impossible. So we then had a look at what factors impact, what factors cause burnout, and Maslach defines 6. So a lack of professional control, a lack of community, a lack of reward, a lack of fairness, work overload, and conflict of values. And what she says, interestingly, is that when you ask teachers what is causing their stress and their tiredness, they will say work overload. However, what Maslach says is that while that is important, if all other 5 factors are not in play, then work overload by itself won't cause burnout. What causes burnout is work overload combined with any number of the 6 factors, and the more the other 5 factors are in play, the worse the more risk you are of burning out. And what she also says is that lack of reward doesn't necessarily mean salary. Although teachers are not well paid, and they will frequently say that with justification that they need to be paid more, lack of reward can and does mean not being appreciated for the work that you are doing. So sometimes when I ask teachers, when was the last time someone said that you were doing a good job at school, some of them can't remember the last time someone said that to them. And that is a major factor. If you're not appreciated and you feel that all your efforts are just not recognized, then that can lead to burnout. And the other element is a lack of control. So the more that leadership tells you what to do, and the less that you have control over your professional life, the more likely it is that you will be at risk of burnout. So as professionals, the question is, do our leaders trust us to do a good job, or are they always micromanaging and assessing and judging us? And what we found is the more accountability measures there are in a school, then the more likely it is that they will be at risk of burnout. And then what we ask people to do, could you, sorry, just...
I'll deal with that.
Could you just turn off your mics, please, because we're having some feedback. Thank you. So we asked the participants in the first webinar, how many of these factors are you experiencing? And then we looked at the factors that they might have influence over and asked them what measures, what actions could you take to diminish the factors or to lessen their impact. If you'd like a copy of that webinar, because it links to this one, then Dory will send you a copy at that email address, and you will get a copy of the slides, which I'll put into the chat at the end of this session. Okay. So these are the 6 causes of burnout with a brief explanation of each. And I'll share this slide with you again. So I'm just showing you it so you recognize what it is when you see it again. And then this slide looks at those factors again on the left-hand side, and then it considers the reasons why each factor might be causing burnout. So what I'd like you to do is to take a picture on your phone of this slide, and then leave the phone open with the picture showing so that you can refer to it. Okay, so just give Dora a moment to do that because she had an interruption there.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. And so if you keep that photo of the slide that I've just shown open on your phone, please. So I'm going to show you slide 2 again, which was the factors of burnout with the green sections. And then on a sheet of paper, I want you to write down the causes of burnout in rank order, according to how much stress you think each factor is causing the staff in your school. So now you're making an assessment of the school and how it's contributing to staff stress and perhaps leading to burnout overall. Now, if you're not working in the school, if you could think about the last school in which you did work and carry out the same exercise, please. So at the top would be the factor that causes the staff most stress, and number 6, the factor that causes the staff least stress. And then put today's date at the top of the page. Take a picture of the page with your phone. And if you, as you're doing this, if you could turn your video off. So you write down the causes of burnout in rank order from 1 to 6, where number 1 is the factor that causes the staff most stress. You put today's date at the top of the page, and you take a picture of the page with your phone. The reason why I'm asking you to put a date at the top of the page is because I'd like you to try and influence your school in some way, if you can, to make changes that will reduce number 1 factor, number 2 factor, etc. in turn. So it just enables you to go back to this exercise and to see what progress you've made. So that's the overall task. Now I'm going to show you this slide again. So you've got the factors. These are not in any order. You've got the factors to work from to create your rank order. And then if you want a reminder about the kinds of issues that might be in play with each factor, look at the photo you took on your phone, because in the photo are some reasons why each factor might be causing burnout. So I'll let you do that. And then what I'd like you to do is turn off your videos and then turn them back on when you're finished the exercise, so I know that you finished it. Those people who haven't got their video on anyway, if you can just turn on your sound so I know you're finished, that would be great. If you have identified the first 2 factors, those factors that have most impact, then don't worry about the rest, because you can only tackle 1 at a time, or at the most 2 at a time anyway. So you could always put the remainder in rank order later. So what you should have in front of you now, just turn my video on. What you should have in front of you now is the 6 causes, or however many you've managed to rank, in the order in which they impact negatively on the staff. So the first 2 are the 2 factors that cause most negative impact. So stress, tiredness, work overload, for example, could be your top cause, which it is frequently for many teachers. Okay, and then you've taken a photograph of that piece of paper that you've been working on with the factors in rank order, and you put the date at which you did the assessment. So I just want to turn back to, before we get to that point, just want to turn back to this slide which you took a picture of. There are only, if you are in a school that is causing you mental ill health, you've only got 4, you've got 4 options. You can stay in the school as you are and cope with it, or try to cope with it. You can change yourself so that the mental ill health you're suffering is reduced because of the way that you handle it. So that's self-care. You can try and change the school, which is what we're looking at now, or you can leave the school. Those are the 4 options. And actually, number 4 might be the only option in some situations. The worst scenario is that if you don't take any of those steps, 2, 3, and 4, you stay as you are, but the school is causing you more and more damage, then the less likely it is that you'll be able to leave the school and start at another school, because any school change is stressful. In changing job in any situation is stressful. So you don't want to be in a position where you can't leave the school because they've burnt you out and you wouldn't be able to cope with the change. Unfortunately, some teachers are in that position. So this is a very simple diagram. On the outer circle, the areas that affect you, but that you can't influence in terms of the whole school impact on your mental health. So I'm not saying that in your case, these areas are universal. It may be that in your case, you can influence some of them, but I've just given you examples. So for example, you might not be able to change the time that school starts. You might not be able to change the time that's been set aside for directed time meetings. You might not be able to change the number of children in the school. You might not be able to change the length of terms, and you might not be able to change the time of day that the school finishes. So the first task when you're thinking about influencing your school is to identify areas that you can't influence, because spending time trying to influence something that you can't change is just going to deplete your resources. So what you need to do then is, in this circle, in the inner circle, you identify aspects of the school that you can influence. So, for example, a lot of schools don't have a staff wellbeing and mental health policy. They have a child mental health policy, but they don't have a policy on staff wellbeing. So if you didn't have a policy on staff wellbeing, the first step might be to create one and to take into account Maslach's 6 factors and address those areas positively in the staff wellbeing policy. So even if you're not in a role where staff wellbeing is part of your commitment, if you went to leadership and said, we don't have a staff wellbeing policy, would you like me to create one? Well, if they say no, then perhaps it's time to leave your school. But it's unlikely they will say no. They're more likely to say, oh, right, okay, well, if you want to create a draft, that's fine. So that might be, so offering to do something extra, which I know it's adding to your workload, but in this case, the aim is that long term, if you start to create a wellbeing policy, then maybe that will get people talking about the need for it. Are you responsible? To what extent are you responsible for the type of marking that you do? Are you marking too thoroughly, too conscientiously? What is the school policy? The school policy might well actually be something that you want to change, but you can only do that in small steps. So you might want to say, I've been finding out about how other schools look at marking or consider marking, and I've got some, potentially exciting areas I could investigate or explore. Is it okay if I do a small pilot with one of my classes for 4 weeks? Again, you're offering to do something that the school isn't doing. And if you present it as a small step, and then you can show the advantages of the way that you're working, how the advantages that it has on the children you teach, then the school might say, well, if it works in that situation, perhaps we ought to consider it. And can you influence how observations are carried out, teacher observations? So again, there are some schools that have moved from teacher observations by leadership to lesson study, where 2 or 3 teachers get together and they observe one another's lessons. And it's either for, I would like you to come to my lesson to see something working really well, or I'd like you to come to my lesson because I'm struggling with something that I'm teaching and I'd like your help. So again, this might sound very alien to your school, but if you make a start by saying, is it okay if 2 or 3 of us try this out for a while? And, we'll report back to you. Again, unless the school is really toxic, it's unlikely they're going to say no, because they will realize that if they do say no, then they've closed down something that might actually be beneficial. So it's making a small step. So that diagram enables you to consider the areas that you're going to have influence over or might have influence over that are worth putting your energies into, because there's a chance that they may work and the school may accept them. So this diagram here is for you now to complete. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. And if you just make a rough copy of the circles on a sheet of paper, and then in the outer circle, write down the areas that you can't influence. In the inner circle, write areas that you can influence, or at least you have a chance of influencing. And again, when you finish, if you could turn off your mic so that I can see that you have finished, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put all of you into a breakout room. And what I'd like you to do is to share the factors that you ranked, which factor came out on top in your school or a school you've worked in, and also just to share some ideas for areas that you could influence if you were to try to change some aspect of your school that is causing mental ill health. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So it's just after, I don't know, it's about 42 minutes to 2 now. So if I bring you back at between 10 to and 5 to. Okay, so Dora, would you like to identify what general discussion, and if you've got if anyone has any questions?
Well, the general discussion, in terms of common themes that came up was just in terms of control, not being able to control the system in a school could lead to a lot of stress. Identifying what we could change from what we couldn't change, what we could not change. We said the system in the UK is Ofsted, in here it's in the UA it's KHDA and ADEC, constantly breathe down leaders next, and that stress is passed down to a team or school. We identified that we could influence ourselves. We could change our attitude towards our workload or our timetabling, or just being organized in terms of how we organize our work. I said I could bring wellness activities, but in an informal way. There's a stigma around, even not just mental health, but even wellness. You're not meant to talk about this. You're meant to be strong. You're meant to be able to cope.
So Jonathan Glazard, who we spoke about earlier, perhaps before other people had arrived, his research also indicates that there's quite a lot of, put a brave face on it. Don't, leave your troubles at the door. Leave your we don't want to hear about your problems when you're in school. And what he's found is that just doesn't work, because particularly with primary school children, even very young children, they know when their teacher is stressed or anxious or down, even if the teacher tries to, put a brave face on, they can see through that. So because it doesn't work, all that does is it just increases pressure on the teacher to be something that they are not. And not talking about well-being and mental health doesn't mean that there's no problem. It just means that people aren't allowed to discuss it. And if you're not allowed to discuss it, inevitably it gets worse. It's like, it's like mental ill health in general. Just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean to say that it's not affecting you and other people. I hope that was useful in terms of an exercise that you could do for yourselves in your own schools or with other schools.
Sure.
So one of the things that you can do with the 6 factors is to set yourself a deadline for tackling factor 1, or to set yourself a deadline for trying to influence your school to reduce the negative impact of factor 1. And if you're a school leader, can you apply that factor to whole school change, to change the situation? So the reason that I asked you to put a date on that rank order was to give yourself perhaps a goal of a timed action, so that by a certain date, you would hope that you would have been able to influence things to be better, and then to compare your rank order then with your rank order now. If it changes, it indicates, or it might indicate, that you've made progress. On the other hand, if nothing changes, then you can ask, well, why is that? It might not be anything to do with you. It might be that the school has just pushed back all the time against you trying to improve things. So that would be another red flag, really. How long are you going to stay in that school if they're not willing to change or influence how they're affecting their staff? The staff are the most expensive, or you spend more on staff than you do on anything else. Yet the way that staff are treated, it's as if that is not a factor. Well, if a member of staff is absent through stress, then depending on your contract and the amount of time that you've been teaching, the school might have to pay for you and a supply teacher.
Yeah.
So the cost of not doing anything is huge. And I think sometimes leaders are concerned because they haven't been trained to look at organizational well-being and mental health. So in that situation, it's far better that they say, well, yes, I want to do something about it, but I really don't know enough about this. Let's have a look and see if we can find other people who do, than try and pretend it doesn't exist because they don't want to deal with it. So just to end, at the beginning, before other people arrived, I said that we're running a conference, an online conference on Friday, the 8th of July. It's a one-day conference. And that's the program. You can have a look at this in more detail because I'll be sending you the recording. And I will share the recording with you. So the cost of the course is £149, but you can get a discount of £60 if you use the coupon code ConferenceDora60 at the checkout. Or if your school needs an invoice, you can quote that code ConferenceDora60, and then we'll apply to your invoice. So that's for anyone who's attended this webinar or the previous webinar or any of Dora's educator contacts. So Dora will share this slide or the link to this slide with you, and perhaps send out an email. And then, and then for one person in this webinar, if you put your name and school email address in the chat, I'll pick out one person at random, and then you can attend the conference free. So I'll contact you within an hour of this webinar ending, which we're going to end shortly. And then I'm not going to go through these slides with you, but just to say that as part of the presentation, you have 3 slides on a book list, which we recommend on wellbeing and mental health. And there's a huge range of topics. Some of them are about you and your self-care, and some of them are about school taking care of you. So, for example, making it as a teacher is about the first 5 years of teaching and how Victoria Hewitt burnt out, and her advice to early career teachers to try and avoid that. And then we've got books which Maslach wrote or co-wrote about the 6 factors. So she hasn't written something for very recent, but actually it doesn't matter because those factors are universal and they're not time limited. So what she found was causing occupational burnout in 1970 is still causing burnout today, in not only in schools but in organizations and companies. And then again, I'm not going to go through this, but this is just to explain what Teach Well Toolkit, my company, does, how we support schools. And you can get more information at teachwelltoolkit.com. This is about me, and this is about Sunita, who is my co-director of Teach Well Toolkit. So Sunita is a primary expert, primary head teacher, and my training is in secondary, so we cover the whole range of experience, really. And this is the end slide. So you have Dora's email address to the right there, and then just a reminder of our email address and my contact email, or our contact email, and then my direct number at the company if you want to get in touch with me. So I hope that you found the webinar useful.